Hi, Kristen. Let's take a look at what you wrote in this new set, starting with the essay about travel. Let's see what you said. Traveling is becoming more popular than ever before. Seeing the world is undoubtedly terrific and gives a lot of joy, but it has some pros and cons. On the one hand, careful with your typing. On the one hand, I love the feeling of freeness feeling. No, this should be I love the feeling of freedom that comes with going abroad. On the other hand, taking a long journey may result in unexpected convenience, such as flight delays or missing trains. Okay, it was fine. There were a few things that I didn't love. One of them was this. You're talking about the advantages. Okay, so this is really kind of a global idea. What is an advantage of travel? What do people gain from travel? And instead of doing that, you had this really specific example that, was very subjective and rather personal. I love the feeling of freedom. So I didn't feel like that was particularly on topic or relevant. It was a little too specific. You needed to talk about travel in a more global, kind of spherical way, if I can put it that way. I hope that makes sense to you. So, in other words, you could have said things like, let's see, on the one hand, travel brings freedom and new experiences that otherwise could not be had. So that is a more general, more kind of global, more kind of spherical sort of statement that I feel would be more appropriate in your introduction. Okay? And then here, it's hard to say that an advantage is something that might happen. I'm sorry, did I say advantage or disadvantage? It's hard to say that a disadvantage is something that might happen. I mean, there is a lot of travel that happens completely without a hitch. So, does that mean that travel has disadvantages even then? So, this kind of theoretical, well, maybe this will happen when we travel. I don't really feel that that constitutes as a disadvantage. For me, disadvantages are something, again, more global, more kind of holistic. So perhaps you could talk about the environmental issues. There's a lot of talk about jet fuel and how that's really destroying our environment. You could talk about things like over tourism and things that happen there. So these are things that have a more kind of global aspect to them. Okay, let's see what you wrote in your body. When one travels to either a foreign country or just to a town close by, it puts a person into a new situation and gives a chance to experience different situations, meet people, and see various parts of the world. This is considered as traveling for fun. Okay. Rather than saying this is considered as traveling for fun, I would have preferred here a statement as to why these are advantages. So, what makes this advantageous? What are the benefits? What are the pros of such thing? I'm in a different situation. Okay, a different situation could also be jail. Do you understand what I mean? So, just because something is different, it doesn't necessarily make it a positive. So show me how these different situations and meeting people, show me how these are beneficial. How do they benefit us? How do they help us? Okay? So that's one thing. Now, let's look at this statement here. I mostly, however, need to travel for work. This means presentations on at different international conferences and meeting new colleagues. I always take the chance to go for a run every morning. I find this to be the best way to see some parts of the region I am visiting. As a result of this, traveling has given me a broad view on different cultures, religions, and I have seen how amazing nature can be. Okay, so what you've done here, I think it could have been good, but you really, first of all, I think you over personalized this. So there are a couple of problems here. One of them is task achievement. The other one is coherence and cohesion. Let's start with coherence and cohesion. So remember that we're talking about, generally speaking, the advantages of travel. So you talked about this here, and I told you what I thought would be more appropriate. Rather than going directly into yourself, this is what you did. You went directly into an example using yourself as an example. And in doing so, you didn't really get around to telling us what your main idea was. All right. So you kind of led by this support. You led by this example. And then at the end, you're like, oh, so the reason why I'm mentioning this is because of this. And that's not particularly effective. So what I want you to do is more of a top down approach. So starting with a kind of more global statement, more global idea about this, and then going down to more of the details, more to the nitty gritty, as it were. Okay. So you were saying here that it puts people in new situations, gives them a chance to experience different situations, meet people in various parts of the world. This helps people by expanding their global view and makes them more tolerant, makes them more cooperative with people that they work with or encounter daily. It has been shown that people who travel widely are more tolerant and are better team players than those who do not. So this is the kind of support I expect from this sort of idea. Okay? Now, when you go to this statement, this was too specific. You're talking about yourself. And again, you led by example, and I don't want that here. Instead, what I want here is something like, let's see, work travel can also provide numerous benefits. When one travels for work, he or she can take advantage of free time by going for runs, visiting, meeting different cultures, religions, etc., etc. And the result of this is whatever you want the result to be. Okay, so that is the right way to organize this. All right, let's take a look at your next paragraph. There are also disadvantages that come with wider traveling. Transportation to the destination is unpredictable. Now, this is too absolute. You don't want to make absolute statements in an IELTS essay. What you want to do is something we call hedge. So when you hedge your arguments, it means that you make them softer. You make them less absolute. So you never say that something is unpredictable. You say that something can be unpredictable. It may be unpredictable. All right. So to provide this window of doubt, which makes it feel less absolute and a little more welcoming to, the idea that perhaps this is not 100%. Every traveler needs to take into account that the travels may be delayed or even canceled. This is indeed truly tricky because when you find yourself in a location where everything is new, it can and will be a real headache to sort everything out. Traveling is also quite expensive, and for larger families, this may mean traveling altogether will be impossible. Okay, so what are you telling us? All right, so you're saying that for larger families. So why don't you tell us that instead? Therefore, it appears that travel is somewhat classist. All right, that would be a great way to put it. So to say that travel is a hobby really is kind of like travel is kind of elitist, isn't it? I mean, if you want to say that you travel the world, that you've, seen different continents and so forth and so forth, you're basically implying that you had the money to spend to do this kind of thing. And so that again is a kind of global way of looking at this. So traveling, especially internationally, is rather elitist because only few people can afford to visit multiple continents and multiple countries, year in, year out. Those who have a lower socioeconomic background can only dream of, such travels, making it seem somewhat maybe unfair in a way. So these are some ways you could have developed this topic. Okay. All right. To sum up, I love traveling and normally cannot wait for my upcoming journeys. Every single trip, even if it is just a day close by, teaches us something new, and therefore I think that traveling is a privilege. Okay, that's lovely. Again, you were a little specific. You really, really focused just on yourself here. You didn't have to. I would have preferred something a little more holistic. Therefore, traveling is wonderful and something that many people look forward to. Okay, so do you understand? That is a way to make it more general, and I think that that is really more called for here. All right, let's take a look at what you did with the movie preferences. Not a ton of information here, just a nice amount, about 6 pieces of information. Let's see what you did with it. We call them bar charts. So it's a line graph, but it's a bar chart or a pie chart. Obviously here, this is a bar chart, so that's more appropriate. The bar chart illustrates movie preferences among youngsters, both in women and men, all over the world. 6 different styles were analyzed: action, animation, comedy, drama, horror, and romantic movies. Overall, both sexes liked comedy the best. Okay, that's fine. I think you could have included an additional piece. You could have included a different, let me try that again in English. I think you could have included an additional piece of information as far as your overview is concerned. It felt a little weak. Both sexes enjoyed comedy, or both sexes like comedy the best. All right, well, what else? Maybe, what else could you have said here? You could have said, however, let's see. However, romantic movies were widely preferred. Um, Romantic movies were widely preferred by women, but were the lowest preference of men. So you could have said something like that. You're not giving data, but you're showing this huge contrast, which I think is very interesting. This is actually the lowest score for men anywhere, and this is the second highest for females. So I don't think this is irrelevant. I do think it's a kind of thing that you could include in your overview. Okay. From the cohort studied, that's nice language, they're good. Males watched action films far more than females. All right, do you know what you just said? You said that men watch these movies more than they watch women. Yeah, I swear, that's just what you said. You want to use a different construction here. So careful when you say somebody did something more than something else. So let's try it again. Males watched action films far more than females did. So when you say that, it implies they watched action films more than females watched action films. Okay, so I hope you understand the construction. This is a little bit of ellipsis, but it really requires some care. At the same time, comma, romantic films were the least popular movie genre among men, but one of the most watched genres by ladies. The distribution among animation, drama, and horror films were almost equal across both sexes. All right, so I feel like here you really miss an opportunity to give us some data. So this was fine for me. In mentioning action films, I think you should have explained to us why you started with action films. You should have said that the second most popular film genre was this, and then you could say males watch action films far more, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so kind of frame it for us. Explain to us why you have selected to speak about the category you have selected. Okay, then I have to tell you, I think it's rather strange that you didn't start by talking about comedy. Yes, I realize that you mentioned it briefly in your overview, but that's all you did. You mentioned it briefly. You did not give us any data about this. And this is one thing I find that students misunderstand about the purpose of the overview. Uh, the overview is supposed to give you a really rather global, like I'm using that word a ton today, sorry. It's supposed to give you a rather just a general trend, a general like kind of global sense of what you're looking at. But just because you mentioned something in the overview, it does not mean you are done talking about it. If it's important enough to talk about in the overview, then it's important enough to give detailed information about in your detailed paragraphs. So what I would have done here is I would have said, from the cohort studied, the most popular genre among both men and women was comedy films, with whatever that number is, 145 for men and 137 for females. Okay, and then I would have said Following this, the second most popular preferences varied between the genders. Okay, so again, you're framing it. You're explaining why you were talking about what you were talking about. So then you could say that while romantic films were the least popular genre among men, they were the second most watched by women. And give us the numbers there. Okay? And then I probably wouldn't have done this. I feel like this doesn't really fit into this. What I would have done instead is I would have talked about the action films. So again, detail about comedy, and then I probably would have done this, and then or started with this and then gone to this. But then I probably would not have included this sentence here. Okay. Looking into total numbers of preference by genre, comedy was the most watched film. All right, you don't have to do this. You don't need to find us the totals. And one of the reasons why you know that they don't want that is because it's not a stacked bar chart. It's showing you they're really just concerned about animation, females compared to males. Comedy, males compared to females. Like that's what they're concerned about. You're not going to talk about the total score here. You would know that they wanted you to do that if they had included either like a total category, which sometimes they do, or if they had made this a stacked bar chart. So for that reason, I feel like this paragraph is just off in general. To sum up, young people like all 6 genres presented on the graph. Clearly, men, careful, men choose. No, men choose or chose. I'm not sure. We have to look at the tense of the rest of it. You have to be consistent, however. Men choose more action than ladies, whereas women like romantic films more often than men do. You see, you did it again. This says that if you asked women what they prefer, they like romantic films more than they like men. Okay, that might be true, but that's not what we're supposed to be talking about here. We're talking about the films. So, women like romantic films more often than men do. All right, so now let me give you a couple of suggestions about what I think you could have done with this. There are a lot of different ways I've seen this done. Some of them are easy and some of them require a little more sophistication. So one way to do it that's really easy is to have one paragraph. I mean, assuming obviously you've talked about your introduction, you've talked about your overview, and then you have to create your detailed paragraphs. Well, one way to do it is to talk about the men on their own. Then have a paragraph about the women on their own. But when you get to the women, you then want to make some comparisons back to the things you talked about regarding the men. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to kind of group similar or actually opposite things together. So what that would look like for me is I would talk about comedy, I would talk about action, and I would talk about romantic, and I would put those all in one paragraph. Why? Because this way I'm talking about the most popular for men and women. I'm talking about the most popular for men, but then I'm comparing it to women. I'm talking about the most popular for women, but then I'm comparing it to men. Then in my next paragraph, I'm going to talk about whatever is left: animation, drama, and horror. Okay, so that's a really nice way for me to do this. I find that it allows like some sophisticated comparisons to be made. And so see, these are some of the things that I want you to think about here. Okay? All right, so a lot of information in this correction. I hope you find it helpful. I hope you can apply some of the stuff we're talking about. Let me know if you have any questions in your next email, and I'll be waiting for your next set. So good luck.